To my next installment in the Momentum Monday series. If you have not caught the other videos or watched them, I would recommend watching them. They aren't cumulative, though. They don't really build on each other, but if you haven't watched them already, please do so. It will help. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about another M. So remember, with Momentum Mondays, I am talking about things that build momentum. As a survivor of whatever type of abuse, doesn't have to be spiritual abuse. I can imagine that it can be really difficult at times to build momentum. And so we're going to be talking about that. And each of the videos that are going to be released on Momentum Mondays have an action step for us to do together that begins with the letter M. So in this one, it is going to be about meals. Now, you probably are wondering, what do meals have to do with surviving abuse? Well, lots of ways those things can be connected. Meals primarily have to do with food and eating, right? And so if you think about perhaps some of the abuse experiences that you survived, it may have been around mealtime. And so even though there may not have been any messages for you around food, the trauma or the abuse that you might have experienced may have been around meal times. Um, and so that could be a trigger for you. Another challenge around meals could be in spiritual settings. In a lot of these spiritual settings, people eat together, and some of the um, I would say the fangs or the claws come out during those times. And so for a lot of us, um, going to these social functions where there is food, there is a lot of judgment, and difficulty around that. I think about um, a place that I left, and I just remember it at that particular place, there was a particular individual who just loved like judging everybody's food choices. And while that might not seem like a big deal to some people, if you're already in an environment where you don't want to be there, the last thing you need is somebody over your shoulder being like, oh, you shouldn't eat that. And you shouldn't eat that, and you shouldn't eat that. And, ooh, don't you know that's bad for you? Basically the food police, right? Um, and so I want you to think about like what are some of the messages that you heard around food and how does this tie into motivation? Well, think about it. You are hungry, right? We all need to eat. And so if you have all these messages around food that are bombarding you, it is going to be hard to be motivated. For a lot of people who have survived abuse, eating can be really challenging. Some of you have talked about this in the comments, sometimes under eating, sometimes overeating, sometimes even like analysis paralysis around what to eat. Imagine you are hungry, maybe you are in between meetings at work or, carting your kids from place to place. You just need to eat something. And then all of this stuff you're stuck with. And so you don't even know what to eat. And so maybe you just eat something convenient that maybe you don't really like, or maybe you do like it and there's judgment around it internally for you. Or, there could be a lot of reasons why there is a loss of momentum around your food and around meals. And so I want you to think about how your meals and how eating has interfered with your momentum in recovering from abuse. You may hear the voice or the messages of the abuser or abusive environment as you are trying to gain momentum. Think about it. Think about how uncomfortable you feel either when you're not getting enough food, where maybe you're eating something that maybe doesn't agree with you, or you've overeaten, right? You don't feel great physically. And so maybe instead of moving on to the next thing and achieving that momentum, you're stuck now dealing with food symptoms that you don't like. And I also want you to think about the messages too that you have received around food. Something that I have found, especially in a lot of spiritually abusive environments and abusive people in general, they really teach you not to listen to your body, right? a lot of people have carried this message that listening to your body is sinful. And so if you have a need and you listen to it and you acknowledge it, oh, you're sinful, you're a bad person. And so of course that's going to be around food, right? You may be hungry and you may feel shame for being hungry. You may be told that only these foods are okay and acceptable, or even things around food preparation. I remember watching a video and this woman talked about that in the environment that she was in, she could not even use like she would bake bread from scratch. And there are two types of yeast you can use when you make bread. There's like the fast acting yeast and there's an instant yeast. And she was told that using the fast acting yeast was sinful. So can you imagine that? Like you can't even eat even the way your food has been prepared is now a burden. And again, remember I tell everyone you got to have nuance on the channel. There are religious and spiritual practices around the preparation of food. That's not abusive in and of itself. There are practices like, kosher, halal, things around how a meal is prepared and eaten. And those things can be very, not only how the meal is eaten and prepared, but also even the meat that is butchered, right? Or things like that. So there are dietary customs and regulations, and they can be beautiful and sacred rituals. But like anything, those things can also be abused and weaponized against people, right? And so I want you to think about that. I also want you to think about just the messages you have heard about food and your appearance. Some people feel so much shame around food because they were shamed for being hungry, right? Shamed for how they ate, how much they ate. A lot of people that I, um, work with who have been through abuse, talk about how they have to eat alone simply because of just the weight that eating with others brings on them in their heart and their emotions, because there's been just so much shame and abuse around that. Maybe you witnessed people arguing, maybe mealtime can be really tough for people. So I've spent some time, going through that, but I want you to think about what are some of the messages that you received around food that were harmful. And then the next thing I want you to think about is, you know, what, what kinds of things did you do as a result? So for some people, they came from messaging around their appearance and how being godly or spiritual meant you had to look a certain way. And so if you got to look a certain way, you've got to fit this aesthetic, then that indirectly means that certain things are off the table or you're a bad person if you eat this. And so there can be a lot of shame around things. So I want you to think about all that. Think about the messages, and most of all, think about how this has interfered with your momentum. And so what part of what abuse recovery entails is you need to be able to reclaim certain things. And one way you can do that is through a meal. So I want you to think about a meal, and it doesn't have to be a meal, maybe for some people it may be a particular food item. It could be a snack, it could be a dessert, it could be a drink. So I am expanding, I guess, the definition of a meal. And I want you to think about something that you can do to reclaim that meal space for yourself. So think about that. What could that be? And when we eat for various reasons. There's nourishment, there's also pleasure. If you think about the abuse that you've experienced, for some people, they were shamed for having pleasure from eating, right? And so, think about how harmful that is. Like, if you like and enjoy the food that you're eating, why is that a bad thing? Now, of course, things have to happen in moderation, but to be shamed simply for enjoying eating, that's not healthy. And so, for some people, they don't eat enough as a result. Sometimes they might overeat to deal with these things. I also want to say that as I'm talking about these challenges, that there are resources for people. If you think that you might have disordered eating, I will put some resources in the description box for you to look at, because it is something that you need professional help with to assess and to treat. So I've said that. now going back to eating. So what is something you can eat for nourishment, for pleasure, or for both? Think about it. It may be something that you were told, don't, you can't eat that kind of food, or don't eat food from this company or this place or whatever it is. And so think about how much fun you can have by breaking a rule that you want. Or maybe it's just saying, I want to eat this mindfully. If you feel ashamed of eating something, you're going to rush through eating it, right? Or maybe you would feel bad because you don't eat enough, And so there are these anyway, or I don't know what I said, just like, yeah, so maybe you would not eat the whole thing out of shame, or you would eat it too quickly and not even want to experience. Whatever it is, think about that thing. It could be a meal. Maybe you are going to meet somebody who you really care about, who supports you out, and you're going to share a meal together. Or you may decide to have a meal by yourself, but instead of doing it to like seclude yourself from others, you're going to do it in a meaningful way. Now, I do have a few rules. I say rules with air quotes, and I am being purposefully a little bit relaxed about this. Think about some guidelines. If possible, if you feel like you can do this, try not to have like anything on. A lot of people will be on their phones while they eat. I get it. Might have the TV on, but try and not have any of that on. And I just want you to savor what it is that you were eating or drinking, whether it is a meal, whether it is a snack, whether there's a particular beverage, just so that you can be immersed in the experience, right? That helps you build momentum. Think about what you're eating. And I'd love to hear from you all in the comments. Tell me what it is that you decided to eat or drink. Did you decide to eat by yourself? Did you decide to eat with somebody else? What did you eat or drink if you feel comfortable sharing, and what did that do for you? And so I want you to think about it. Is this a nourishment meal? Is this a pleasure meal? Is it both? As you're thinking about what it is you're eating, how do you feel like it's nourishing you? Maybe it is, I don't know, whatever it is, maybe you decided to incorporate certain things in your diet. Maybe you're like, I want to have more fiber. And so you're eating something with fiber in it. And how is that nourishing your body? The fiber is helping your digestive system function better. There could be something pleasurable for you. Maybe it is, um, you know, I don't know, whatever it could be. It could be a hot cup of tea, it could be a cold glass of lemonade. But I really want you to immerse your senses as much as you can into that. What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What's the temperature like? What do you hear? Maybe if it's something like Rice Krispies, you can hear the snap, crackle, pop, whatever of the cereal. If it is maybe a drink that's cold, you hear the ice clinking against each other, you feel the condensation on your fingertips, whatever it is, really try and immerse yourself in that experience. And then I want you to connect that to momentum. So how is this getting you going? Maybe that those 10 minutes of pleasure you got from eating a pastry from your favorite bakery has propelled you to the rest of the day, right? Because you're telling yourself, hey, I am worth this. I am investing in eating something that I like with, and even if there may be shame messages there may be guilt messages, well, you're still eating it anyway, right? So maybe that small pocket of pleasure gets you through the day. Maybe it's nourishment. And so because of that, you feel fueled, you feel good and healthy, ready to go for whatever comes next, or maybe it's a mixture of both. So I have said enough. Again, if you feel like you are having some challenges with eating, in the sense that you feel maybe you could be having some, eating too much, eating too little, eating disorder sort of stuff, I have put some resources in the comment section or description box for you. Okay. So there's that. And then also, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What are you getting into? What are you eating? I would love to hear from you and how that experience helped you gain momentum. All right. Well, I hope you have a wonderful day that is filled with peace. Bye.